Alright, so we have a great opening hand here. Gonna keep with Splinter Twin plus Pestermite. We pretty much have to keep. No questions there. So gonna keep this one. And we don't have to play our Mox Diamond now. Can go ahead and fetch with the Scalding Tarn if we want to, but just gonna play the Scalding Tarn and pass the turn. Now this is a turn 3 win that we have in hand. We have a turn 3 win in hand, assuming our opponent doesn't interact with us. We can go Pestermite turn 2, Splinter Twin turn 3, game over. So that's the plan. And sure, we'll fetch for Steam Vents here. And gonna Mox away the island and pass back here. Now, we're hoping our opponent taps out for some big spell, essentially. We don't want our opponent to just attack and pass. But it looks like that is what our opponent's going to do here. So the question now is, do we flash in the Pestermite or not? Our opponent's got 3 cards in hand. And it's a pretty close decision to whether or not we flash it in. And I don't think we do. I think it's a little bit risky. We can go ahead and preordain here if we want to. We could also play Chandra Pyromaster and try to eat the Elvish Mystic, and I think that's a reasonable choice as well. Alright, let's go for that. Change my mind mid-play there. Gonna go for the Chandra Pyromaster. Now, if our opponent has a counterspell, we want this to get countered in a way, because that's gonna open the door for Splinter Twin Pestermite later. So, alright, there's the counterspell. So the Chandra is going to get countered. So that's unfortunate, especially by Mystic Snake. So now our opponent has a very real clock on us. So presumably we're going to take 5 this turn. And that's going to put us all the way down to 11. So that was a big swing. And if our opponent has more gas, looks like it's going to be a Charlotte's Agent. So enter Raphaelos. This is our opponent's deck looks pretty nice. I will say that much. And wow, so we actually found Chandra Flamecaller here, and that could be a really big play for us next turn, even if we aren't able to get off our combo. So I'm gonna preordain. We don't want both of these lands, so I'm gonna put the plains on top. And just pass the turn here. So the question really now is, do we go ahead and try to tap something? It looks like our opponent's going for Skull Clamp here. That's a pretty powerful card. So our opponent's going to be able to get rid of that Elvish Mystic and play an Eternal Witness. Okay. But it looks like we are going to be able to get our combo off and win, most likely. Assuming everything works as planned. So our opponent's entering beginning of combat. We can actually go ahead and tap down Raphellos here. So we're going to take the 6, but then we just play Splinter Twin on Pestermite. And our opponent does not have a way to interact with that. So, yep, Splinter Twin on Pestermite. Game over. So that's going to take us to game 2. It's a good thing we did not choose to jam the Pestermite there on turn 2. Even though we had the turn 3 combo, but our opponent was forced to Mystic Snake the Pyremaster, the Chandra Pyremaster, and then that opened the door up for what happened later, as we saw there. So, looking at the sideboard options, our opponent seems to be going wide with small creatures. So, the Wildfire effect is a card that's pretty attractive. So we could board that in. We already have Chandra, which is kind of similar. So it may be that we just don't feel the need for it. Although Ral Zarek in this matchup on the draw, it could be a little bit slow. Sure, fine with cutting the Ral Zarek, I think. Although Mana Leak, we saw a lot of mana acceleration out of our opponent. So that could be a potential cut, but gonna cut the Ral Zarek. And move on from here. So that was basically the dream scenario for our deck. This, on the other hand, is not the dream scenario. Just not enough lands here. Mox Diamond needs a land. So yeah, we're not gonna be able to. I mean, if we drew an untapped land, we could suspend Riftwing on turn 2, but I think it's a little bit risky. So I'm gonna go ahead, take a mulligan, and this hand we can suspend Vision on turn 1, which is nice. But other than that, not much going on. Still gonna keep it. Signet is a pretty good card to see here. We're looking to draw now more lands, so we can curve out. And hopefully our opponent doesn't have a super fast start. And we can get this Ancestral Vision to resolve, but we're a ways away from that. So Raphellos is extremely powerful here. If we draw a mountain, we could potentially just shoot it down right away with the Crater's Claws. But we do not have a red source that we can use for the Crater's Claws, so our opponent's going to be able to untap with Raphellos and play whatever big threat they might have in hand. Potentially, that if something like a Garrick, comes down, that would be really bad. For just one example of a card that we really don't want to see. And here's some more mana fixing here with the Lotus Cobra. So it looks like our opponent's deck is straight blue-green. And this is worrisome. We have the Pestermite, but we are not lucky enough to have the Splinter Twin this time around, unfortunately. And our opponent presumably is digging for gas here with the impulse. And these threats and the acceleration out of our opponent is so cheap. We see these really inexpensive mana creatures, and it looks like our opponent is passing the turn. So that's an interesting decision. Clearly leaving mana up for Rafellos. And the draw here is Mana Leak. So I don't think we want to do anything. Pretty comfortable to just pass the turn and make our opponent make the move here. It looks like our opponent is making the move. It's going to be Factor Fiction. So we're just going to want to Mana Leak that here. We can't really afford to let something that powerful resolve. Even though our opponent's still got 4 cards in hand. We're hoping that they're all lands, obviously. But that very well might not be the case. And we saw cards like Shardless Agent. Here's an Eternal Witness. That can get back Factor Fiction. Now our opponent can cast that Factor Fiction. And so, yeah, I mean, we're in some major trouble. Alright, so this is going to resolve. And we're going to be forced to make some piles. I think the Nissa Worldwaker is by far the most powerful card, so I'm just going to put that in a pile by itself here. And it looks like our opponent agrees and is just going to take the Nissa Worldwaker. So we're going to have to now try to somehow get through that card, even though it can come down next turn. We're going to have to try to find a way to get past it. So there's a Goblin Dark Dwellers. Not what we wanted. So I think I like passing and then tapping down this Rafellos with Pestermite. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and flash this Pestermite in. Now our opponent can just go land into Nissa still, but this will at least stop some of our opponent's mana producing capabilities, potentially. Although maybe it looks like our opponent doesn't have the land, which is interesting. So we don't have the Splinter Twin in our hand yet. So I don't really mind trading the Pestermite here. Although if we do, it's going to mean the Scavenging Ooze is going to get bigger. So that is definitely something to consider. Alright. I'm going to go ahead and trade away the Pestermite for this Lotus Cobra. Conserve our life total and hope that we can find a moment in time to get rid of the Scavenging Ooze. Alright, so here's the Ancestral Vision. And now, wow, so we actually drew the Splinter Twin off the vision. So that's a feel bad situation where we're like, alright, now we really wish we had made a different play. In retrospect, of course. So, alright. Well, we can still get rid of the Scavenging Ooze if we want to with the Crater's Claws. So, let's go ahead and do that. And now that I'm looking back on it, I mean, it's results-oriented thinking, but we knew the Ancestral Vision was coming off suspend. I think we probably should have just not traded away the Pestermite, even though the Lotus Cobra, it's a good card. Definitely frustrating to know that we could have just already won this game, and instead we're going to have to fight through this Nissa. So, gonna take 6 here. Now we have a Chandra Flamecaller that we can potentially leverage to our advantage. So I like playing Delver of Secrets here and leaving open Restoration Angel. So our opponent's going to untap. And these 4/4s are definitely annoying. So yeah, we're going to flash in the Restoration Angel, but not looking great. So we can get rid of some of our opponent's creatures here. But unfortunately, these 4/4 lands, even if we wipe the board with Chandra, our opponent still got the Nissa Worldwaker. So I don't think there's much we can do. We could play Chandra, -4, sweep the board. But yeah, this is a game that I definitely regret just making that block. We were in a bad spot, and Splintered Twin was one of our outs. So should not have blocked with the Pestermite, and it cost us the game. So let's try to bounce back and get this last game. We're going to be on the play here. So that's good news. I don't think we need to do a ton to the deck. So I'm going to submit it. And we're on the play with Ancestral Vision, Delver of Secrets. Sure. Going to keep this. So we can go, we have the option between going turn 1 Delver or turn 1 Suspend Ancestral, but I think we definitely want to suspend the Ancestral Vision. And we just want to draw lands at this stage. Mana Leak is actually an interesting draw. I think now we could just hold up the Mana Leak. And there's definitely an argument to doing that. Yeah, I'm just going to hold the Mana Leak up rather than play the Delver of Secrets. We've seen so many powerful 2-drops, and I think we're pretty happy to counter Raphaelis or Lotus Cobra or Scavenging Ooze. So let's get that Raphaelis out of the way. Now, we could have gotten rid of it with a Crater's Claws, but we'll just save that Crater's Claws for something else. And we basically just didn't want our Mana Leak to be dead, which it potentially could have been. So now I'm going to play the Delver. And feeling pretty good about this situation. Knowing what's in our opponent's deck, we haven't really seen removal spells for Sower of Temptation. We've seen some counter magic. All right, here's an Eternal Witness. That's pretty good. That's going to get back Raphaelis here. So, all right, let's try for a Delver flip. All right, the card on top is Restoration Angel, not what we wanted. So, with Dualcaster Mage in hand, I'm just going to pass here. I think we're fine with trading the Delver for the Eternal Witness, even though it's a strict 2-for-1 for our opponent. We've got this Ancestral coming off Suspend, which we do have to think about. So, gonna make the block. And it looks like our opponent is going to pass the turn, so this could mean a counterspell, we'll see. So I think we are going to wait for our opponent to act here, and we'll see if our opponent has something like a counterspell or the Mystic Snake, which we saw. Alright, so it is going to be the Mystic Snake, but we can actually play Dualcaster Mage and copy this, so I think we want to do that. Make sure we draw these cards. So one of our Ancestral Visions is going to get countered, but we're still going to get one to resolve, but unfortunately only got one land right there at the end, the Steam Vents. So once again, I like playing conservatively, just passing with the plan of blocking with our Dualcaster Mage. We've got so much gas that we don't really need to take too much of a risk. And unfortunately, it looks like our opponent has Nissa Worldwaker again. So that's an issue. We've got Sunburn in our hand, but we don't have... And it looks like our opponent's actually going to plus Nissa and untap lands. That's an interesting choice. So if we draw a land here, we can potentially just go land, Praetor's Claws, away the Nissa. But unfortunately, that Compulsive Recharge is not the land we wanted. So the question is how to proceed from here. We could play Sower of Temptation. There's also an argument for Electrolyze, getting rid of Raphellos. We could deal the Nissa 1. Cryptic Command is another option. We've got a lot of choices, a lot of potential options with this hand. I think Cryptic Command is definitely an attractive option at this stage. Our opponent's got 2 cards in hand, so holding up Cryptic is nice. So I'm just going to pass the turn, allow our opponent to untap with this Raphellos, and have access to basically as much mana as our opponent could possibly want. And there's a Library of Alexandria, so we're not the only ones with that card. So it looks like our opponent's going to make the 4/4 here and get in. So I like making the trade here of Dualcaster Mage for Mystic Snake. We can take the 4 from the island, essentially. And here's a Fauna Shaman. I'm inclined to let this resolve. We don't really want it to resolve here, but we also don't have a great alternative. So gonna let the Fauna Shaman resolve. And now we can Electrolyze the Shaman if we want to. We can also go after Raphellos and Nissa. So I like going after Raphellos and Nissa, actually. So let's do that. We can redirect one of the damage to the Nissa. But it looks like our opponent may just be tapping mana with the Raphellos, unclear. Alright, so our opponent didn't have a way of utilizing that mana, but unfortunately we bricked again, which is pretty unlucky. So, yep, just a bunch of cards in hand. Gonna go ahead and jam the Sower of Temptation and steal this island from our opponent. So this game is interesting, for sure. Our opponent's got a Fauna Shaman, which, if our opponent has a creature that they don't want, can certainly upgrade that into a much more significant threat. But it looks like the play here is going to be to get aggressive with this Library of Alexandria. Now, since our opponent's holding back the Fauna Shaman, that's a little bit scary. So yeah, it looks like our opponent is gonna... Okay, our opponent had Emrakul in hand, so that's gonna get cashed in, and we'll see in a minute what our opponent has access to. And it looks like it's gonna be Raphelos. Okay, so our opponent shuffled their deck and then found Raphelos after the Emrakul trigger resolved. So that was an interesting interaction for sure. So here's a land. And now it may be that our opponent is playing towards Emrakul, but we could actually just bounce this Library of Alexandria and then tap our opponent's creatures and try to pick off this Nissa. So that is what I'm leaning towards doing right now. We could also go for Crater's Claws. That's turned on. So we could Crater's Claws the Nissa. But I'm going to go for the Cryptic play. Seems like a really solid option. So this is going to allow us to potentially get this Nissa off the battlefield, which is what we failed to do in the last game. And our opponent can make a decent amount of mana. If our opponent has a big Eldrazi or something in hand, that would certainly be bad. Alright, here's a Shardless Ancient into a Lotus Cobra. So, not what we wanted to see, but we should be able to manage this board. I think we can manage this board. So we also have Goblin Dark Dwellers in hand, so we can Dark Dwellers Electrolyze and Electrolyze Raphelos and Lotus Cobra. Although it looks like our opponent has other plans, so we'll see what the play is here. Could be activating a Fauna Shaman. Okay, it's going to be a Hangerback Walker for 3. Alright, so our opponent is now Hellbent, which is that part of it is good news. Happy that our opponent's Hellbent, but the board is... It's a tough board to deal with right now. So I like the Goblin Dark Dwellers play. We could also play towards Searing Blazing something, like Searing Blaze Fauna Shaman, play Compulsive Research. Yeah, just gonna go for the Goblin Dark Dwellers here. And we're gonna leave up this island. So I think Raphelos and Lotus Cobra are just the highest value cards our opponent has right now, so we can get rid of those 2 cards and leave a 4/4 island and a Dark Dwellers back. So next turn we can potentially get rid of this Fauna Shaman. We're hoping to fade a big draw step here, although it looks like we were not able to. Our opponent peeled a creature. It's going to be Kozilek, so we'll see what gets found now. I could see it being something like Eternal Witness. We saw Scavenging Ooze. It could be another creature that we're unaware of that our opponent has. So it's going to be Trigon Predator, actually. But that card against our deck isn't... It blocks Sower, but at the same time, it's not super threatening. So here, I think we want to cast this Compulsive Research and see what we can find off of that. We're in the danger zone. So we're definitely going to discard a land. And this Library of Alexandria could help us gas back up. Although we have Restoration Angel. So we can go Restoration Angel plus Goblin Dark Dwellers. That's pretty good on this board especially. So the question is, how do we attack here? Do we have good attacks? And do we want to activate the library? So I do like activating library here and then playing Mox after. So we can draw a card off our library, and our deck is actually whittling down. We've only got 15 cards, it looks like, left in our deck. So gonna play the Mox Diamond here. And that we can get rid of an island with, I think makes the most sense. Sure, we'll get rid of an island. And we're really now in the stage of thinking about how do we want to kill our opponent? How do we want to end this game? And I don't think we have great attacks, actually. So just going to pass the turn and see where this gets us. We don't really want this Hangerback Walker to die. It's just going to be... That would be a huge pain to deal with at this stage. Now, our opponent may attack with the Trigon Predator, which we would like to happen. So it looks like our opponent is going to make that attack, and now we can flash in Restoration Angel for a bit of a blowout. So the question is, what do we want to blink here? And I think there's definitely an argument for blinking our Sower of Temptation. There's also an argument for blinking the Dark Dwellers so that we can draw more cards. So I'm going to go for blinking the Dark Dwellers. And then we can flash back the Ancestral. Or the Compulsive Research, but we just want to go for the Ancestral here. That's going to allow us to draw 3. And this is how we just kind of go straight through our deck. And there is the Wildfire effect, which got boarded in. And clean block, that's going to eat the Trigon Predator. We're hoping our opponent didn't draw something amazing. Here's Splinter Twin. So it looks like a lot is coming together for us now. I'm going to play a land. We could actually put Splinter Twin on Restoration Angel. Although we still have Pestermite left in our deck, so I'm going to get in there in the air, see if our opponent has anything they can do. And it looks like they do not. So our opponent's now down to 12. We've got Crater's Claws. We might have lethal here. Let's start with a Searing Blaze to get rid of the Fauna Shaman. And we played a land this turn. That's going to bring our opponent down to 9. Then we can Crater's Claws to, I believe, kill our opponent. So we've got 4, 5. Yeah, so we can make enough mana to kill our opponent. Because this is going to have Ferocious. So, yep, this should be the game here. Unless our opponent has some sort of counterspell. And yep, that's going to be the match.